So you want to know about Caesar, but I can't talk about Caesar without talking about what happened to Rome during his lifetime. Everything that happened from his birth to his death had a massive impact on the type of man Caesar would be. To keep it simple, I'll just focus on Julius Caesar instead of his nephews, great-nephews and relatives like that. Just a heads up, Romans have a lot of names, so I'll try to simplify to what they're best known for. So most people will be called by their most prominent name like Caesar or Pompey. Get ready for a lot of Latin and exorbitant details to understand half of what happened. Important to know that with Roman history, often on topics you will find yourself being pulled down tangents to try to understand what's happening. Warning: this covers the history of Rome around Caesar's life, and not all of that history is pleasant. The history of Caesar has intense acts of violence, cruelty and notions that may be considered offensive in modern times. Listeners' discretion be advised. Gaius Julius Caesar was born on the 12th of July, 653 years since the founding of Rome, or 100 BCE. He was a renowned politician and general for the Roman army. His family was an ancient aristocratic line that could be traced back to the founding of Rome, known as a patrician family. Prior to the conflicts of the order in 500 BCE, the patricians were held in high esteem as they were the descendants of the 100 men appointed by the first king Romulus. After the conflict, however, being a patrician was basically the same as being a noble in medieval Europe. In the Roman Republic, two distinct groups held political power, the patricians and the plebeians. Plebeians basically being fancy talk for everyone else that wasn't a patrician. There was also the slave caste, but they didn't have any political power, so they are not included. Caesar's family was known as the Jinns Julia, a family that traced their lineage back to a common ancestor. It was the ancestor Gaius Julius Lawless in the Jinns Julius line that held the position of consul in the year 489 BCE, just 20 years after the last Roman king was deposed and a republic was established. In Caesar's time, many Romans took pride in the fact that they were a part of a republic, having overthrown their last king roughly 400 years ago. So much so that Marcus Junius Brutus, Quintus Servilius Caepia Brutus, same guy just different name after he was adopted by a relative, or just Brutus, proudly claimed to be the descendant of Lucius Junius Brutus, one of the founders of the Roman Republic and helped overthrow Tarquin the bloody tyrant. Jinns Julius line claimed to be either the descendants of Trojans who fled after the city's destruction to the descendants of a king of Latium. What exactly doesn't matter, that it's important to know that their line was known for being a prestigious one. The surname Caesar is said to have come from the praetor, basically a general, magistrate position, Sextus Julius Caesar of 208 BCE. Possibly being derived from the Moorish word for elephant because he is said to have killed one, the Latin word lacut, the great quantity of hair, or because his eyes color. The third one is the most believed because of a grammarian in the 2nd century CE, leading it to become the most commonly believed one. Before the age of 16 and not much is known about Caesar because no one decided to write down what was going on. All we know is that in 85 BCE, Caesar's father, also known as Gaius Julius Caesar, died and the 16-year-old was now the head of the household. It was also around this time that there was a small thing called a civil war going on in Rome. The two parties were the husband of Caesar's aunt, Julia, Gaius Marius, and Cinna, as the Marians, against General Lucius Cornelius Sulla. This was because Sulla led his army and marched into Rome, more specifically crossing the Pomerium with his army. This was huge because the Pomerium marked where the original walls of Rome stood. Crossing it with an army had a huge symbolic meaning, as with one exception, no weapons were allowed across the Pomerium. Though it was just a series of marker stones, every Roman adhered to the rule and only crossed the Pomerium in designated areas. Doing otherwise meant death. Might be a bit of an overreaction, but these are the Romans and they did things their way. Now to extremely simplify, score left to fight in the First Mithridatic War, allowing the Marians to hermit Crabban and seize power. They had about 100 Roman citizens put to death because they were loyal to Sulla and set the decapitated heads in the public forum, the area that pretty much every Roman citizen frequented. The two men in charge of the Marian faction, Marius the Elder and Cinna, basically said that everything Sulla did was bad and stupid, so it doesn't count, and also exiled him just for that measure. Marius also took Sulla's place and appointed Cinna in charge of Sulla's eastern lands. Top it all, after they declared themselves the Consuls in the year 86 BCE, meaning that the Marian faction had control over Rome. Consuls had the right to veto any bill that was being passed in the Senate, and along with being immune to any form of legal prosecution so long as they were in power, consuls were only in power for a single year and alternated primary control every month. It was also after this that Marius conveniently decided to die after 2 weeks of being in charge, leaving Cinna as the sole power in charge of Rome. Cinna wanted Sulla to not be in charge of anything, so he sent a group of men out to relieve him of command while the Mithridatic War raged on. The man that he put in charge of that task force, Flaccus, was betrayed by his second in command, Fimbria, and murdered. Things quickly dissolved into chaos back in the Roman. Cinna was murdered in a mutiny. Sulla ended the Mithridatic War in a Roman victory and returned home. Sulla returned home and kicked everyone's arse. Marius the Younger led what remained of the Marian faction's army and fought Sulla's forces in combat. They lost, and in the year 81 BCE the survivors of the Marian faction fled to Sicily, the province of Africa, the lands of modern Tunisia, and Hispania, Spain. Sulla sent a task force of 6 regions, 120 warships and 800 transport ships sent to Sicily under the command of one General Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great. Pompey also captured the Roman province of Africa after retaking Sicily. With the last of the Marian faction captured or killed, Sulla was declared the dictator of Rome. Dictator had a very different meaning back then, basically meaning they had full control over the Roman government, military and policies in a time of crisis. The consuls also had very limited veto power over the dictator's decision, and all the magistrates were expected to adhere to the dictator's decision. The dictators were also limited to only having control of matters directly related to the reasoning that they were elected dictator in a maximum duration of 6 months of power. After nearly 6 years of civil war, the Roman Republic was in dire need of some financial stimulation, so dictator Sulla declared a potent proscription. Proscription meant that anyone was deemed to have not acted in the best interest of the Republic was to have their assets liquidated to be given to the Republic before being murdered. The exact number of proscribed citizens is unknown, but it is believed to be anywhere between 1,500 to 9,000 Roman citizens of high standing. Any attempts to harbor a proscribed citizen would be met with immediate execution. If a Roman citizen personally killed a proscribed citizen, then they can receive some sort of financial compensation. One of these proscribed citizens was Julius Caesar, Marius's relative. It was only because Caesar had relatives that were Sulla's supporters he was able to survive the proscription or violent culling. Sulla enacted several major political reforms, with the primary being the reduction of the power of the plebeians and the increase of the Roman Senate from 300 to 600 senators. With his last flex, Sulla expanded the Pomerium, the first to do so since the last king of Rome. You'd think that with his power, Sulla would remain as dictator, but in 81 BCE he stepped down and re-established the normal consular government, before running and winning the consul seat in the year 80 BCE. That story had a direct impact on the life of Caesar, as he had witnessed firsthand what a proscription was and the impacts that they had. Caesar was also at the time the Flamen Dialis, high priest of Jupiter, the position that he was stripped of given the fact that he was related by marriage to Marius and by extension his faction. So instead of being murdered, he just lost his job, the dowry for his wife Cornelia and his inheritance. Choosing not to divorce his wife, Caesar instead fled. It was only because the family of Aurelia Cotta, his mother, intervened. It was, ironically, because he was stripped of his position as the high priest that Caesar was allowed to join the army. The high priest had several major constraints on what they were allowed to do. They couldn't sleep outside the bed for more than 3 days. They couldn't sleep outside of Rome for 1 day. They couldn't ride a horse. They couldn't touch metal. They couldn't see a dead body. They couldn't look at an army. They couldn't be elected consul. They can touch flour. There were 21 major constraints on their powers, but keep it simple, they could only perform their duties as a priest and had to be attended to for all other matters. So since Caesar was no longer a flamen dialis, he could run for consul, govern a province and lead an army. That's what he did. Since things were so hot back in Rome, he decided to join the army and was stationed in the lands known as Asia Minor, Turkey, the Caucasus region, the Levant region, Persia and the Asian Peninsula. He served in the army with distinction, earning the prestigious civic crown for his service during the siege of Mytilene, the second highest accolade a soldier could receive, just under the grass crown. The civic crown is awarded to people who "save the lives of fellow citizens by slaying an enemy on a spot held by the enemy that same day." This was a lifelong distinction that said Roman could proudly display, while also not being limited at just one civic crown. Theoretically, it would be possible for someone to be seen walking down the streets of Rome wearing a dozen of these wreath crowns. Anyone who had said crown was entitled to entry of the Roman Senate and was required to wear said crown at every public event. He was near the end of his service at the time in 80 BCE that the 20-year-old Caesar was sent to get the king of Bithynia, a kingdom in the north of Asia Minor, Nicomedes IV, to send his ships to help in the siege of Mytilene, a city located on the island of Lesbos. The king agreed, and it was said that the two had a close relationship after the long time they spent in each other's company. Now I'm not saying that the two were lovers, but I am, and so did Suetonius and many others at the time. Bisexuality was fairly common amongst the Roman aristocrats. The issue that people had was that it was said that Caesar was the bottom. If he was the top, no one would have a problem with it, but it was because he was said to be unquote passive in the relationship. Even being seen wearing a dress, scandalous. According to Roman law, a Roman citizen in the course of a homosexual relationship with the passive side was punished. But no one had any evidence, so it remained as a rumor, though one that was quite prevalent even after many years. 2 years later, in 78 BCE, Sulla died. Now, without someone trying to actively kill him, Caesar returned to Rome. Without his inheritance, as it had been confiscated by Sulla, Caesar could only afford a modest house in the region of Sabra in Rome with his soldier's wage, a noticeably low-class area in the city. Around this time he also decided to practice legal advocacy, known for his elegance in speaking and extravagant gestures during his ruthless prosecution of corrupt former governors. Between 78 to 69 BCE, Caesar set sail on the Aegean Sea and was captured by pirates. This incident is best known because when they asked for 20 talents, 680.4 kilograms or 1,500.025 pounds for Americans, of silver, Caesar insisted that he was worth more and requested that they ask for 50 talents. He was also known for being fairly relaxed with his captors and unquote joking with them that once he was free he would come back with a fleet and crucify them all alive. He was mostly true to his word because he did raise a fleet of ships after he was freed and crucify them all, the only difference being that he slit the throat beforehand. This was all before he was called back to the army to fight off invaders from the east. During his stay in Rome, he was elected the military tribute, a one-year electoral position in which the military tribute was put in command of a portion of the army under a consul. Important to know that getting elected as a military tribune was almost essential to any aspiring political figure. This is important because in 69, Nice, BCE, Caesar was elected questor or investigator, in which he chose to serve in the province Hispania, Spain. Before that saw the death of his first wife Cornelia, as well as the passing of his aunt Julia, known as the laudatio volii. During the funeral procession, Caesar was noteworthy as during the ceremony Caesar said, quote, "The family of my Aunt Julia is descended by her mother from the kings, and on her father's side is akin to the immortal gods. For the Marciarages go back to Ancus Marcius, and the Ilii, the family of which ours is a branch, to Venus. Our stock, therefore, has at once the sanctity of kings, whose power is supreme among mortal men, and the claim to reverence which attaches to the gods, who hold sway over kings themselves." This was definitely a way to pay her the respect she was deserved, and not a shameless self-promotion of his own distinction. Now the age of 41, Caesar, serving in Hispania, came across a statue of Alexander the Great and felt disheartened, as he was now at the age that Alexander was at when he had conquered the lands from the Nile to the Indus River. He returned to Rome, and in the year 67 BCE, he married his second wife, Pompeia, granddaughter of Sulla. This marriage was a short one, as in 61 BCE he divorced her because of her embroilment in the Bonadi scandal. This is a story of its own, but to simplify, a senator by the name of Publius Clodius Pulcher likely had slept with Caesar's wife during the Bonadi festival. A man by the name of Lucius Cornelius Lentulus Crus, someone who had a grudge against Clodius for causing a mutiny in his army and destroying his marriage, led the trial against him. Lucius Cornelius claimed that Clodius had committed incestum, not incest but incestum, a capital punishment. Incestum meant that someone had violated religious purity, i.e., raping one of Vestal virgins who, as the name suggests, are virgins who are sacred. In this case, trying to sleep with Caesar's wife during the Bonadi festival, requiring the Vestal virgins to repeat the rituals as to not anger the gods. Anyway, the whole trial was less about defending traditions and upholding the Roman ways, as Lucius Cornelius and Clodius claimed, but to smear the other. In the end, the guilty subject was found guilty and sentenced to death. Oh wait, I forgot that Clodius was rich. Instead of being punished for the crime he likely had committed, he bribed the judge with a sack of money and got off scot-free. Caesar had decided that, due to her involvement in the incident, to divorce Pompeia. The Greek writer Plutarch wrote on the incident that, quote, "Caesar divorced Pompeia at once, but when he was summoned to testify at the trial, he said he knew nothing about the matters with which Clodius was charged." His statement appeared strange, and the prosecutor, therefore, asked, "Why, then, didst thou divorce thy wife?" "Because," said Caesar, "I thought my wife ought not even to be under suspicion." Totally not a desperate attempt to save face after a scandal. Going back a bit, Caesar was elected as Curuletos in 65 BCE, which was an elective position that oversaw the maintenance of public buildings, management of public festivals, enforcement of Roman laws, and supplying food to the city. The curule aedile was joined by the plebeian aedile, a position only available to plebeians, compared to the curule, which was open to plebs and patricians. During his time in office, Caesar staged extravagant games which earned him clout. Between his appointment of Curuletos and the Bonadi scandal, Caesar ran for the position of Pontifex Maximus in 63 BCE. The Pontifex Maximus was basically the head of the Roman state or religion. Two well-connected senators ran against him and accusations of bribery were thrown around, but Caesar somehow won against the senators with better standing and experience. Definitely didn't bribe to get the job. Also in 63 BCE Cicero gained the consulship and had to deal with the attempted coup of Lucius Sergius Catilina or Catiline and his conspirators. Catiline was best known for being acquitted from his adultery with the Vestal virgins thanks to a very likely dose of bribery. Catiline decided that he was dissatisfied with the Roman Republic, definitely not because he lost the consulship to Cicero, along with several aristocrats and plebeians who all were thrown out of office due to scandals, and veterans from Sulla decided to overthrow the consuls Marcus Tullius Cicero and Gaius Antonius Hybrida. This was discovered by Cicero, who denounced the conspirator amongst the Senate in the temple of the chief god Jupiter. So Catiline, being the brave man he was, bravely ran away. The Catiline conspiracy was ended due in part to the conspiratorial correspondence being brought to the Senate by Cicero. With the irrefutable evidence, the 5 main conspirators were sentenced to death without trial, much to the objection of the Pontifex Maximus, Caesar. How ironic with hindsight! To prevent them from being freed by the Catiline and the remaining conspirators, Cicero ordered them to be strangled in their prisons immediately. Having personally escorted the Centurion Sura, Cicero declared Vixire to the cheering crowds. Vixire roughly meaning they had lived, or that they were now dead. With much of their support gone, Catiline led his force of 3,000 into a final battle. Found near the front of the dead following the battle was Catiline, having thrown himself into the fighting and died with his men, bearing wounds on their front. This is important as it showed that they died in combat instead of fleeing. With the threat to the Republic over, Cicero was declared the Pater Patriae, the father of the fatherland. The love wouldn't last forever, as Cicero was forced into exile 5 years later by Caesar and Publius Clodius Pulcher for putting Romans to death without a trial. The year after the Catiline conspiracy, Caesar was elected as Propraetor, or acting governor of Hispania Ulterior, other known as southwestern Spain. But before he could go, he had to settle his debts. Knowing that what was owed exceeded his available wealth, he turned to Rome's wealthiest citizen Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus agreed in return for his support of Pompey. In Hispania, Caesar led a military expedition against 2 tribes and was proclaimed Imperator in 60 BCE, the highest military honor a soldier could achieve. For Imperator to be recognized requires the conquest of new territories for Rome, the declaration of Imperator by the soldiers, and for the Senate to recognize their achievements. The problem for Caesar was that the consul election was coming up soon. He needed to be present in Rome to get elected. Caesar's issue was the Imperator couldn't enter the city of Rome as when soldiers cross the Pomerium, the line which separates Rome from the world, they relinquish their military powers. In the Senate, several key figures wanted Caesar to stay out of the consul seat, so they prolonged their discussions so that Caesar would miss the election. Caesar asked to be granted an in absentia which would allow him to run while not being present, a proposal which Marcus Porcius Cato Uticensis, Cato the Younger, denied. Surprising everyone, Caesar relinquished his imperator and ran for consul by entering Rome and submitting his proposal in person. Hopefully, this deliberate act by Cato doesn't come back to haunt him. Foreshadowing. Next time, I'll cover Caesar's time as consul and his campaigns in Transalpine Gaul. This is because there's a lot to cover there. Like a lot, including the best known parts about the guy. I've been the Irish Explainer, and this has been a brief history on Caesar from his early life to 60 BCE. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to place them in the comments below. Let me know what I should cover next. Have a great day and make sure to like, comment and subscribe.